When I bought a peaceful mountain cabin years ago, I never imagined it would become the scene of a luxury party scandal. Nestled deep in the woods, it was meant to be my quiet escape from the chaos of city life, a place I could go to unwind, clear my head, and just breathe. But when I recently decided to visit, after being away for months, I found something I never expected. The sound of music blasting through the trees and a string of expensive cars parked along the dirt path that was supposed to be private. At first, I thought I was just passing by someone else's gathering. But as I got closer, I realized the unthinkable. This party was happening inside my own mountain cabin. Strangers lounged on my porch with cocktails. Someone had strung fairy lights across the roof, and the smell of grilled food and perfume filled the air. And right in the middle of it all, there she was, Karen. I didn't know her yet, but she looked like she owned the place. Loud, commanding, and dressed like she was throwing a Hollywood event. She greeted guests like this was her home. I stood there for a second, completely stunned. Who was this woman? How did she even get access to my property? And more importantly, why was everyone acting like this was totally normal? As I walked up to the front steps, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just confused anymore. I was angry and determined to get answers. What I didn't know yet was that Karen had a whole web of secrets. And this unexpected showdown at my own doorstep was just the beginning. What happened next turned this quiet mountain retreat into the center of a wild and unforgettable story. I walked up the wooden steps, each one creaking beneath my feet, and the closer I got, the more surreal it all felt. The cabin I'd carefully designed over the years, hand-picked furniture, custom woodwork. My family photos was now filled with designer throw pillows, champagne glasses, and people I had never seen before. Music thumped through the walls, and a hired bartender stood behind what used to be my old reading nook. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a luxury rental gone wrong. Karen spotted me just as I stepped through the front door. At first, she gave me a quick glance and smiled, clearly assuming I was another guest. But when I didn't smile back, her expression shifted. I watched her try to figure out who I was, and then it clicked. Her eyes widened, and just for a second, she looked nervous, like she'd been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to sound calm, like she wasn't clearly hosting a full-on party in someone else's house. That was my first real look at Karen, confident, polished, and the type of person who always had a smooth excuse ready. But underneath her charm, I could tell she was calculating. I told her, flat out, that this was my property. Her smile dropped, and the room felt like it froze for a second. A few nearby guests overheard, and I noticed some of them glancing around. Suddenly, unsure if they were supposed to be there, Karen didn't back down, though. She said there must be some misunderstanding. She claimed she had rented the cabin from someone online. But the more I asked, the more vague her answers got. That's when I realized this wasn't a mistake. And Karen wasn't just a guest. She was hiding something much bigger. I stepped further into the cabin, ignoring Karen's fake calm and taking in the sight of my belongings rearranged like set pieces in a luxury Airbnb listing. My personal photos were nowhere in sight, replaced by abstract art and high-end decor I'd never seen before. Even the antique coffee table, something I had inherited from my grandfather, was now covered in spilled champagne and glossy magazines. It was like someone had erased every trace of my life here and turned it into a showpiece for strangers. Karen kept talking, trying to explain that she'd booked the place through a verified rental agent, but every detail she gave was sketchy. No agency name, no paperwork, just vague mentions of a man who handled everything. When I asked for proof of payment, she conveniently didn't have access to it. Her confidence started to feel more like a mask the longer we talked. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos of the crowd, the damage, and Karen herself. That's when she finally got nervous. She tried to wave her hand, insisting we settle this privately, but I wasn't playing along. A few guests began to murmur, clearly realizing something was off. One woman, in particular late 30s, designer dress, holding a mimosa, slipped outside quietly, which caught my attention. Why leave so suddenly? That's when I started thinking, was Karen doing this to other people too? Was this mountain cabin just one stop in a larger scam? I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't her first time pulling something like this. There were too many moving parts, too much confidence in how she operated. And while I was piecing things together, someone in the kitchen who looked like part of the catering crew whispered something to Karen. Her eyes darted toward me, and just like that, her expression changed again. Whatever she heard, it had clearly shifted her strategy. And that's when I realized, this was going way deeper than just a party. Karen's calm facade started to crack as she stepped away from the crowd and whispered urgently with someone in the kitchen. I caught snippets of their hushed conversation, words like problem, owner, and call, and my heart pounded harder. It was clear she hadn't expected me to show up, and now she was scrambling to keep control of the situation. The guests, once lively and relaxed, now looked uneasy. Some whispered among themselves, stealing glances at me and Karen like they were watching a slow-motion showdown. The music faded into background noise, replaced by a tense silence that wrapped around the cabin like a thick fog. I could feel the weight of their stares, and in that moment, I wasn't just confronting an imposter in my own home. I was facing a tangled mess of lies and deception that spilled over into my quiet mountain retreat. Karen returned, her voice sharper now, trying to regain authority as she announced the party was wrapping up. But the damage was done. I could see doubt flicker across her guests' faces, and I wasn't sure if they believed her anymore, or if they were wondering if they'd been part of something illegal without even knowing it. Then, just as I was about to demand she leave, the sound of sirens pierced the evening air. Everyone froze. The flashing red and blue lights danced between the trees, getting closer. A sudden tension filled the room like a thunderstorm about to break. Karen's eyes widened in panic, and her carefully constructed world started to unravel. Before my eyes, no one had called the police, at least, not that I knew of. So, who had? And what were they about to find when they arrived at my mountain cabin? Now the scene of a luxury party gone wildly off track. Everything was on the edge now, and the truth was about to come crashing down. The sirens grew louder, but before the flashing lights even reached the driveway, something unexpected happened. Karen abruptly grabbed her phone and rushed outside, dialing frantically. Her voice was sharp, urgent, but I couldn't catch what she was saying. Then, just as the first police car rolled up the narrow path, she turned back inside and announced that the party was officially over. Everyone needed to leave immediately. Guests scrambled, some grabbing their things, others casting worried looks in my direction, but just as the police officers stepped onto the porch, another car appeared, this one without sirens or flashing lights. A sleek black SUV pulled up, and out stepped a man who looked like he owned the whole town. Tall, serious, with an air of authority. He didn't introduce himself, but walked right past the officers and straight into the cabin. Karen's expression changed completely. Fear replaced her earlier confidence. The man started questioning Karen quietly but intensely, and I caught snippets about unauthorized use, illegal activity, and property disputes. It was clear this wasn't just a simple party gone wrong. Somehow, my mountain cabin was tied into something bigger, something I hadn't seen coming. The police officers, meanwhile, started asking me questions, but my focus was locked on the tense exchange happening inside. Karen looked trapped between panic and defiance, and the mysterious man held all the power. The guests had mostly disappeared, but the weight of the situation kept growing heavier by the second. I realized this wasn't just about someone throwing a luxury party without permission. It was about control, secrets, and a battle over this cabin that was much more complicated than I'd ever imagined. And with every word spoken behind closed doors, the stakes were climbing higher. What was Karen hiding? Who exactly was this man? And how far would this go before everything came crashing down? The tension inside the cabin was unbearable as the man in the black suit finally turned to face me. He introduced himself as a property investigator hired by the bank that held the mortgage on my mountain cabin. What I didn't know was that Karen had been running an elaborate scheme, secretly renting out my home as a luxury event venue without my permission, pocketing hundreds of thousands while leaving me in the dark. The bank had caught wind of suspicious activity linked to the property, which is why they sent him to investigate. Karen tried to defend herself, claiming she thought she had legitimate permission from an agent who, it turned out, didn't even exist. The police officer stepped in, explaining that unauthorized use of private property for commercial events was a serious offense. Karen's charm vanished under the weight of the law and the mounting evidence against her. Guests began to return, their rental items, and some quietly slipped away. Realizing they'd been part of something illegal, I felt a mix of anger and relief. My sanctuary had been violated, but justice was finally catching up. The man assured me the bank would work to protect my ownership rights, and the police promised to keep an eye on the property to prevent further misuse. But just as I thought it was over, Karen's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face paling. "It's not just this cabin," she muttered. The man raised an eyebrow. Karen confessed that she'd been orchestrating similar schemes across several mountain properties in the area, exploiting gaps in local regulations and evading authorities for months. Suddenly, what seemed like a single incident exploded into a regional scandal. The investigation was only beginning. I realized my fight for this cabin was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle, and the story was far from over. In the days that followed, the reality of what had happened started to settle in. My mountain cabin, once a quiet retreat, had become a focal point in uncovering a larger network of illegal luxury rentals run by Karen and her associates. The local authorities launched a thorough investigation, and several other property owners reached out, sharing similar stories of their homes being used without consent. It was overwhelming to realize how widespread this deception had been, but also reassuring to see justice moving forward. I spent time restoring the cabin carefully, bringing back the personal touches and memories that had been overshadowed by the chaos. The experience taught me to be more vigilant about protecting my property and trusting my instincts when something feels off. It also made me appreciate the true meaning of home, a place not just of walls and furniture, but of peace and control over one's own space. Karen's actions had disrupted many lives, while the community's response showed the power of standing up against wrongdoing. It wasn't just about reclaiming a mountain cabin. It was about protecting what belongs to us, respecting boundaries, and refusing to let greed take over. Looking back, I'm grateful I showed up that day. If I hadn't, who knows how long this scheme would have continued, or what else might have been lost. My story is a reminder that sometimes we have to confront uncomfortable truths to protect what matters most. And even when things seem out of control, standing firm can turn the tide. The mountain still holds its quiet beauty, and now, with the cabin back where it belongs, I can finally breathe easy again, but the lessons I learned will stay with me forever, and maybe, just maybe, this story will help others stay alert when something doesn't feel right.